when things are going awesome, that's the time to build the support. That's the time to strengthen the foundation. It's going to be really, really hard to do it when there is a storm, as an example here.
She's like, because it's going to unlock you in so many ways. It's going to help you unlock in so many ways. You're not going to a coach because you're not adequate. You're going to a coach because you want to be even better. And I think that reframe, if we can just try to work on that, it's super important.
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another episode of Next Level University, where we help you level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's episode number 1557, 3 things to work on if you want to shift your identity. Today, for episode number 1558, who is the person you feel safest around? Had a call with one of my favorite clients in the world. We've become quite good friends at this point. Been working with this person for at least a year now, over a year. And this person's been going through a lot in their personal life, emotionally. Just dealing with the inner stuff. Going through it. Identity, going back to what we talked about last episode, looking into why they have shame around certain things, why they make certain decisions. And he said, "Hey man, can I ask you something?" And I said, "Of course. What's up?" He said, "I was at the gym today, and I really felt like I needed to ask you this question, but I just am so scared, and I have so much shame around it." And I said, "Okay, hit me with it. I'm here. You're safe. Let's do it." And he said, "Money's super tight right now. Is there any way we can make some changes to the package to make it more affordable?" And I said, "Yeah, man, of course. You're good. No worries. You're good. Let me see what I can do, and I'll send you a message, and we'll take care of it. No stress. I don't want you to have to be stressing about that." And he said, "I'm grateful. I really, really appreciate that." And he said, "I feel very safe here. I feel very safe when I'm with you, and I feel very safe to tell you this type of stuff and just to talk about my life with you." And I said, "That genuinely means the world to me. It means more to me than you probably realize. Because, again, I'm just a podcast coach, quote unquote. But the fact that you and I are friends at this point, and I know the intricacies of your life, I do not take that lightly." But imagine if he didn't have somebody to tell that to. Then all of the growth that comes with that bravery and that courage and that vulnerability and looking in the mirror, it wouldn't be the same. There's definitely still going to be some growth because he already looked at it enough to ask me about it. But that's one of the reasons the community aspect of growth is so important. And I do think it's underspoken about.
Definitely.
It's hard to grow by yourself. It is really, really hard to grow by yourself because you have to have someone to talk to about what you're going through. It helps.
Definitely.
A good friend of mine one time said, "Who does Superman go to when he's struggling?" And what he was asking with that was, I tend to be the person that everybody goes to. Who am I supposed to go to when I'm struggling? And it's a super important question to ask because, number one, you have to go to the person that you feel safest being vulnerable with. And if you don't have that person in your life, it's going to be really, really, really challenging. Last thing before I kick it to you, Alan. I mentioned this on episodes before. The best time, from my perspective, the best time to build a relationship with vulnerability in it is when you don't really need to. When the necessity isn't super high, when your back isn't up against the wall, when you do have some abundance and some good vibes going on in your life. And the reason is because when you do get that dark night of the soul and you are going through it, it's very hard to build a vulnerable relationship then. So I use the analogy, you don't build an umbrella in a rainstorm. You experience rain, a thunderstorm. You experience rain, you go home to the safety, the warmth, and the dryness of your house, and you say, I want to avoid that. What do I do now? What do I do from the safety of my house? Oh, I'm going to build an umbrella. Next time I go out, I won't get as wet. I think it's the same thing when you're going through it. It's really hard to ask for help if you've never done it before, and if you don't feel like you have that type of relationship with someone. So that would be, I guess, an early preemptive next level nugget is when things are going awesome, that's the time to build the support. That's the time to strengthen the foundation. Because it's going to be really, really hard to do it when there is a storm, as an example here.
I was trying to think of where I want to go with this episode. I think one of the reasons a lot of people turn to therapy is because they can trust someone and have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
About what they're going through and what they're growing through. I agree. Maybe I'm unique in this belief, but I actually think life is really, really difficult. I always have. I went on a show last week and they had me tell my story, and it's just interesting because I've started telling my story again, and my story just started, I said it started in adversity. My father died when I was 2. So I never had any sort of life where it's like, yeah, this is great and it's all going to be good. I think you just, right out of the gate, you go, okay, bad things, really, really bad things happen. And that's life. And I think that despite that, you can create a meaningful, wonderful life that's deeply fulfilling. And so I was trying to think of where I want to go with this, and those gut checks are going to come, and when they come, who do you have to go to? Because if you don't have anyone, that's going to be brutal. That's going to be awful. Yeah, and I think that the value in this episode is check in with how vulnerable you can be, how honest you can be with other people in your life, how much you trust them. And I remember I had a friend group back in the day. It was a group of guys. And the level of vulnerability in this group is just so low. And I don't want to be... Yeah, I'm going to do it. All right, if you've ever been a part of a text thread, Kev, have you ever been a part of a text thread with like a fantasy football league or something like that?
I've never played, nor will I ever play fantasy football, no.
Okay, fair. All right, so I was in a text thread once with, it was a fantasy football league, and I don't even like football, so I don't know why. I like the sport football. I like to throw the football. I don't watch football. But this is a group of guys that love fantasy sports, and that's all fine. But the amount of ego in this group is just wild. It's, in hindsight, it's alarming. It really is. And at the time, it was the water I was swimming in, so I didn't really know. And a lot of it's playful and funny, but underneath it is just a lack of any vulnerability whatsoever. Picture a group of guys that kind of are all pretending that they're super confident, that really deep down they're lost and pretty unhappy. And I've confessed with Kev in past episodes where, in hindsight, I was much more emotionally immature than I realized. I think intellectually I was always strong, but emotionally immature. And I think a lot of men are. I guess a lot of women are too, but I think statistically men tend to be more emotionally immature. Yes, I am saying that. Okay. Now, that said, what does emotionally immature mean? It means you get a gut check, and it means your ego gets crushed, and it means that you are unable to be vulnerable and therefore unable to actually transform. It takes humility, courage, and vulnerability to say, I think I have a drinking problem. It takes humility, courage, and vulnerability to say, I don't really know what my future is going to look like. It takes humility, courage, and vulnerability to say, I can't live like this anymore. It takes humility, courage, and vulnerability to get a therapist. There's not, statistically speaking, I don't know, I could look it up. I think it's like 70% female for mental health and therapy, I think. And again, don't quote me on that. I didn't look it up, but I do know it's primarily, like, females are far more likely to get a therapist. I do know that, statistically speaking. And I think that, I always joke, I say, guys can't even ask for directions, never mind get a therapist. And I'm being playful, but and again, I'm not trying to make this a male versus female thing. We all struggle with similar things. I think males and females have certain nuances that they tend to statistically struggle with more. That's all I'm saying. Please, no one, come at me about this. My point is I'm a man, and I'll speak for men. There is something that affects your ego when the idea of getting a therapist comes up. There's this like, wait, am I not good enough on my own? Do I need help? What does that mean about me, right? And Emilia often says that she's never seen a man with less of that, whatever that is, male ego. We'll call it male ego. And I know that I have it, and it is what it is. But it holds us back from a lot of things. And so the point of this episode is having a safe space. The point of this episode is talking to someone else about the real things going on in your real life. I surpassed my 5,000th coaching session where people tell me the stuff that's really going on. But when you look on social media, most people are portraying something that's wonderful, and that's okay. It's a highlight reel. I'm not making it wrong. I do the same thing. I have really, really, really bad days where I don't want to be on social media. The last thing I want to do is post about it. Okay? Everyone deserves their own privacy. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if when you are struggling, you feel like you can't tell anyone, that's a very dangerous place to be. I remember I would get sick constantly when I was in high school, and I missed like 3 months of school. And I remember I had a friend group, and I'm not going to blame it on them, but my friend group I struggled to be vulnerable with. And I was really sick, and no one knew it was what I was going through, and I was going through family stuff at home, and I was on the struggle bus. I was having such a hard time. I was so unhappy and so miserable and so unhealthy, and I was getting chronic sinus infections. And I remember my friends would make fun of me. They said I had baby syndrome. And they had no idea what I was going through. They were just presupposing. They were making fun of me because I skipped so much school or stayed home from school. And at the end of the day, now I know what it is. I know that it's just toxic masculinity. It's you're not allowed to struggle. Suck it up, buttercup. And honestly, those same people that made fun of me back then are just not doing well. And I bet you they're struggling behind the scenes more than they are willing to admit. And I hope they get help. But don't be around people that you can't struggle with. Because you're never going to work on a problem that you can't be open about. If you can't be open about the problem, and you feel completely alone and you can't share it with anyone, you're just going to stew in the problem more. And you're going to swim in doubt and fear and scarcity. And I just don't think that's good for anybody. So whether it's a therapist or a coach or a friend or your intimate partner, find people who you feel safe to be imperfect with, who you feel safe to be honest with. And I think that if you don't feel like you have that, you got to work on that, because that's a terrible place to be. I was there. I was definitely there for a time in my life, and my mom was there for me during that time, but it felt like no one else was, and I don't wish that on anybody.
Hi, my name is Tim Melanson, and I have a web development agency called Creative Crew Agency, and I'm also a podcast host of the Work at Home Rockstar podcast. I met Alan a little over a year ago. He was a guest on my podcast, and we had an epic conversation, and I was just really impressed with his work ethic. And so I decided to jump on board with him, and it's been a little over a year now. My business has grown, but more importantly, I feel much less stressed and much more purposeful with what I'm doing and the direction that I'm going. So I definitely highly recommend Alan. If you're looking for some accountability, if you're looking for some tools, then look him up, take him up on this consultation.
Those people were very uncreative. That's what they come with, baby syndrome. That's the best you can come up with. That's weak ass diss. So no shout out to whoever those humans are. Do better. No, I'm kidding, obviously. The vulnerability, courage, and humility, this is where it gets a little wonky. If there's somebody in your life who makes all of those easier, being vulnerable with them is easier. And this is why it's so important to hang on to those people. Or for me, it's important to be a good partner when it comes to that. You wanna sabotage a relationship when your partner or somebody that cares about you and you care about deeply brings you something vulnerable. If you want to mess it up, be egotistical or arrogant. Mm-hmm. That's a one-way ticket to disappointment town, unfortunately. And I think that's helped me a ton listening to other people, because that's the real stuff. When someone's bringing you stuff that's existential, I feel this way about myself, that's the time for you to be consistent and reliable and warm, open, inviting. So this is a really good thought process. Maybe to that person's point when they said, who does Superman go to when Superman needs a day off or Superman needs to talk? Maybe if you're struggling to be vulnerable with someone else, it's because people are being vulnerable with you, and maybe you only get one side of the coin. That's a potential. I don't know. I don't know if that reigns true, whatever the saying is. I don't know what it is. But I don't know. I know for a long time it was really easy for me to be open to people being vulnerable with me. In a lot of my relationships with friends, I was the listener, and I still am. I'm the listener with Alan for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Not that I don't feel comfortable being vulnerable, but I think when somebody is vulnerable with me, I can be vulnerable in the conversation and accomplish the same thing. So again, I don't want to make it about me and Alan or Alan and me or Alan, but that's a very important thing to understand.
Where does this come from? Why aren't people, like, even in hindsight, it's like, why was I afraid to share any of that? Who cares?
Because they would have made fun
if
of
you get sick? Yeah, they would have made fun of
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Somebody has to start it. Somebody has to open up the door for vulnerability, I think. It's safe
Yeah,
here.
people make fun of people.
Somebody needs to say, it's safe here.
At this stage in my life, there's not a lot of that going on. Nobody, like, makes fun of anybody. I feel like I'm...
Well, look at who's in your life. Of course not. It makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, if it's so different than it used to be. If any of those people ever said any of that, it would just be so different. It would be like, what?
Yeah.
You're a loser. Like, I would just give it back to them in their own way. Be like, what are you doing? You know, I wouldn't be toxic with it, but I feel like in hindsight, I regret taking so much of a beating. I do. I regret allowing... I remember, Kev, when we first met, he's like, you have shitty friends.
You did. You did, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't like
interesting.
him. I was going to hang out with him. You know, I remember there was one time Alan and I were at a party. I think this is the only time we were ever at a party. And one of his friends said something to someone, and I was like, dude, why don't you shut your effing mouth? Like, nobody likes you. You're an asshole. You're an asshole, man. I was drunk, so I had the courage to do it, but that was the truth. Like, you're just not a good person. And I don't know why everybody keeps you around. I have no idea. You must have some secrets on people. I have no idea why these people keep inviting you back.
Yeah,
nobody
low
likes
self-worth,
you.
man. Low self-worth.
I know. And again, that's a very hardcore way to put it, but this person was toxic to people I cared about.
Yeah.
So for me, the last thing I was worried about was their feelings.
Why do you think people become toxic? Like, what is that?
Oh, man.
It's got to be insecurity. At the end of the day, it's just a lot of insecurity. It
I
makes
would
you
say
feel
that.
bigger and more powerful to, like, beat up people mentally and emotionally or physically.
Insecurity with a block for vulnerability. It's almost like you double down on the insecurity and you have to overcompensate. Rather than opening up the door, you have to put more bricks on top of it. And then it's just overcompensation. And then I just think it's really hard to break free of that eventually. When you were telling your story about therapy and Emilia, I was thinking, I went when I was 25. And that was the hardest thing ever at the time.
Yeah, I know.
It was brutal.
Doesn't it feel not hard at all anymore? Like,
Yeah.
we've grown so much.
Yeah.
Why was it so hard? Let's have that conversation. Because I had that moment too of, I'm going to go to therapy? Like, the guys have that. I don't know if this is, again, I'm speaking for men because I'm a man, but I've been coaching a lot of people, especially couples. There's a thing with guys. I'm telling you, there's a thing.
I think it looks weak. I think it quote unquote.
It looks
I'm not saying
weak, yeah.
It really is. But it's perceived as. Here,
Weak.
think of this. How excited were you to tell me that you were going to therapy?
Yeah, I would say pretty high.
Right.
I was a little bit concerned to share it though. Like, outside of you.
Yeah, that makes
For
sense.
you, it was definitely like, yeah, definitely.
That.
But publicly, it was definitely a little bit like,
understandable.
I could probably do without sharing this.
Understand.
But I also don't want to perpetuate that. And the other thing, too, is it's been so helpful. And it's not what people think. It's not like this is something I want to share really quickly. Because I do think this needs to shift. It does. 100% needs to shift. I'm not going to therapy because I'm broken. I'm going to therapy because I want to be even more. I want to grow. I want to get even better. You see how that's such a reframe? One of them is like, you can't handle it on your own. You're not enough. You're blah, blah, blah. That's not what it is. Emilia framed it as, you're leaving a lot on the table. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? She's like, because it's going to unlock you in so many ways. It's going to help you unlock in so many ways. You're not going to a coach because you're not adequate. You're going to a coach because you want to be even better. Mm. And I think that reframe, if we can just try to work on that, it's super important. Remember when people used to call it a shrink way back? Yeah. It's like, oh, you're going to see a shrink? And so, I don't know. That whole thing needs to shift for sure. And I want to be a part of the shifting. And I have noticed we do relationship talks coaching, but a lot of couples that we coach are doing this as an alternative to couples counseling. And I can tell a lot of times the male is more reluctant to do that. And I think it's societal in some ways, and I think it's cultural, and it's rub some dirt in it. It's, like I said, the best way to articulate it is that playful joke. Men can't ask for directions, never mind get a therapist. I think that's a funny joke, and I think that's funny because it's true, and I think that needs to shift. And I'm grateful that Kevin and I are a part of that shift. So anyways, I don't want to make it about us, but at the end of the day, whether it's a therapist or a friend or your intimate partner, if you cannot be humble, courageous, and vulnerable, and that's not safe, you should reevaluate your peer group. I really wish I had done that sooner, to be honest.
I did a post the other day. It was talking about goals, and it was pretty much, if you can't tell your friends your goals, you don't need new goals, you need new friends. And that that is it. If you can't, it's the same through line. If you can't tell people the truth, the vulnerable truth about what you're feeling, and I also don't want to lessen it. I know it's very, very challenging, and I'm very blessed to have amazing people that do make it easier. But it's worth looking at. That's all. It's worth looking at. Relationships that are deep and meaningful and just at a real important level of human emotions and vulnerability and fear, that is a really valuable relationship. That's a real relationship. But it can be scary. This will be my next level nugget. Just imagine this. If someone is surrounded by vulnerable people, they're going to have the opportunity to be vulnerable a lot more. If somebody is surrounded by people who are ego-driven, there's just more resistance to vulnerability. So this is just another one of those episodes where your community matters. If you're hanging out with people who value health and fitness, you saying, hey, can I get a salad with dressing on the side? Nobody's going to make fun of you for that. Yeah. But if the people don't care about that and they think that's whatever, well, that's dumb or that's stupid or whatever, then maybe they're going to make fun of you. It's just the core values, core beliefs, core aspirations, and core competencies. I think being vulnerable is a competency. I think it's something you learn over time and you practice. That's my next level.
Before we go real quick, can you share why you think it was so hard to go to therapy when you were 25?
Tattooed, bodybuilder, in really good shape, super quote-unquote successful, doesn't really talk about his feelings. I should be able to figure it out by myself. That was really my thought.
The narrative, yeah.
Yeah, it was mostly that. My partner pushed me.
What do you think now?
By definition, it's challenging to do, which means when you do it, it's a strength, not a weakness. That's when people ask me on shows, I say that all the time. If it's hard to do, and the reason you're not doing it is because it's challenging, you doing it means you're strong, not weak.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite. Yeah. So that's my new frame. I think it's extremely noble to talk about it if you feel safe talking about it. I think it's the bravest thing, and I think it's really, really, really good for you And anybody who makes fun of that or whatever, maybe they just don't understand the importance of it yet. Maybe they just don't get it. But there are people out there that do. I mean, there's two people right here that do. There's people that do, but there's also people that don't, unfortunately. So just make sure you have the right people around you. The right people can make the hard decisions a little bit easier and the hard times a little bit easier. The wrong people can make the right decisions impossible and the hard times even harder. They can make the easy times hard. So it's just another one of those episodes.
Yeah, my next level nugget is ask your intuition who around you is toxic. And if you can't be honest or vulnerable around certain people, most likely they're, at least to some degree, toxic. And my next level nugget is sail away from toxic.
Sail away.
Mm-hmm. Sprinkle a little belief on it.
That was from last episode. How dare you cross that over into this universe? Next Level Nation, if you are looking to find more safe people, if you're looking to find more of your people, quote unquote, whatever that means, people who are into growth, people who talk about their feelings, people who talk about what's real, our 13th round of group coaching is starting on January 2nd.
Oh, yeah?
January 2nd. And there's a lot of
Tuesday.
There's a lot of these conversations during the calls. We talk about what's real, and you will be safe. It is extremely inclusive. You will be supported. You can be the real, authentic version of yourself. So if you're longing for that, we will have the link in the show notes. Our 13th round of group coaching. We'd love to have you there.
Successes and struggles. You are safe to talk about where you are succeeding, and you are also safe to talk about where you're struggling. We don't want to talk about our successes because we're afraid to appear arrogant. We don't want to talk about our struggles because we want to be just successful enough but not so successful that we get ostracized. It's safe to talk about both in group coaching. Those are private sessions for only group 13, for only your group, and they're that way for a reason, so that you're safe to be vulnerable. Also, speaking of safe spaces that are not recorded, book club. Not recorded. Every Saturday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're reading a book called High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. We have vulnerable discussions in there about what you're going through, and I always say this, probably so much, in fact, that people get annoyed. Struggles and successes, same deal. You can talk about where you're awesome. You can talk about where you're struggling. It's totally okay. We talk about what is accurate, what is real, what is honest, what is humble, what is vulnerable, what is courageous. And it's an awesome space where you're not going to get made fun of. There's no one making fun of anybody. No, none of that.
Not up in here.
Not up in here.
Not up in here. Tomorrow, for episode number 1559, one place shame shows up for a lot of us. Shame is a heavy, it's been a heavy week of episodes leading into the holidays, at least for us, the Christmas season coming up. So, another one. As always, we love you. We appreciate you. Grateful for each and every one of you always. And at NLU, we do not have fans, we have family. We will talk to you all tomorrow.
Find that safe space. Next Level Nation.